Hey there, YouTube. Welcome back. This is the Allegheny Northern in N scale, and we are about to do a rather late August update. And the reason we are running just a tad bit late here for this month's update, or last month's as it were, is I thought that if I got into the Labor Day weekend, I would have a little bit more to show you, maybe some trains running. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. So we're going to show you where we're at with forward progress here, and hopefully to give away too much as to what happened in the last month. So if you can't tell, we are missing a key scene here, and that is my intermodal yard. And the reason it is gone is because we started the expansion of the layout. Now, there were a couple of goals, if you recall from my video discussing what the progress goals were for the layout, and there were some things that I wanted to do. One was I wanted to remove the intermodal yard and not damage it, and that was successful. I was able to cut it out, remove it, and you can see that I've replaced the plywood with a new sheet of plywood, and that was perfect. The second goal, and I'm going to turn you around here, was to get rid of my S-curve. Okay, my S-curve is gone. And I know you're like, well, wait a minute, what is that? That is a much gentler S-curve made up of much broader curves, and I do not have any issues with any of the trains navigating this sort of sweeping curve. So this was all accomplished. But I did lose my quarry scene. It is gone. And I knew that in moving this over, I was going to orphan the connection to it. So that's not a problem. It's going to be a very simple fix of extending these a little bit further into the mountain and then coming back out over here. So this scene is going to get reworked a little bit. Not a big deal. It's a lot of work, but it's easy to do. So the track was salvaged, the wiring was salvaged. It's just a matter of reconnecting everything and sort of building out this scenery and making everything look right. We are going to lose a little bit of elevation, so the main line is not going to sit quite as high, and the quarry is not going to sit quite as low as a result, and so the grade into the quarry is going to be a lot gentler, which is going to be very helpful. And also it's going to let me extend our winter scene here a little bit. So I think the quarry is still going to be, I'm going to keep it towards the front so that I can put a scene divide. I don't want the quarry to be in winter because I don't want to put snow all over it. I want it to be clean. So we will put a line of pine trees here just like we had before and separate winter from just not winter. Okay, the third goal, I guess, that we wanted to do here was to get rid of that stupid traveling bridge section. It was very inconvenient to get people in and out of the layout. It just, in order to have guests appear inside the layout, they had to first come in, then I had to slide that section in, I had to connect it up, and then of course everybody was trapped inside the layout, and that was not convenient at all. So I cut back the section of the layout where the intermodal yard was at, which is why it had to leave, and I extended the main line. And so yep, it's a very long, very straight, rather boring sort of a run. But what I'm going to do here is this going to actually allow me to sort of bring my winter scene down a little bit further and keep it on going. So for those of you who like the winter scene and like the winter work, I am going to continue it from here down, and then I'm going to have a much larger transition period out of winter back into fall. So that's going to let me play with the seasons that I kind of like, that late fall, early winter, and then transition back into fall. So I get to play with winter, I get to play with fall, and the season in between. So I'm okay with that. And although this looks like a club layout at a train show with a bunch of straight track, I am going to make it interesting enough through scenery to sort of hide the fact that it's, well, not interesting. So it's obviously all double tracked, and it keeps on going, and don't worry, you can still get inside the electric panel, does not block that. And then it needs to come up, and then it disappears under the stairs. And you'll notice that there's a little bit of a realignment going on there. I had a slight miscalculation in what I was doing, and so I ended up about 1.5 inches higher than I needed to be. So I knocked that all down, and I'm working on the process of getting that repaired. So what's going to happen here is, other than me adding a railing so that guests and myself don't stumble over this, I'm going to extend a tunnel out of here a certain distance, probably right here, just to clear the steps a little bit, and then just make it out of foam. That way the train disappears. It doesn't look like it's running through the steps. It looks like it's running through scenery. So that will be part of the transition out of the winter and the fall. Okay, so the reason I needed to do this was because I still needed to make my loop with my main line. So now I can run all the way through the steps, continue down here, and then, of course, back onto the layout. Now, none of this is set and ready to go yet. I'm still sanding out joints and all that sort of stuff. So the track is very much in its testing. Okay, now looking back from where the Allegheny cut was, and although I really liked that scene, it obviously was not going to be able to stay. So I needed to realign the track here to come across this area, and you see that little gap there. That's going to come in real important here, and then it runs in that direction. Don't mind that piece of foam. It's just stopping my train from being a runaway here. So instead of having a piece of section of layout that I have to move out, I do have a gate now. So it swings nice and clear. I'm not going to open it up all the way here just because I'm doing this one-handed. And then it closes, and it closes tight. Use some plastic, super glued into the rails and filed to the railhead profile to sort of bridge that gap just a little bit. The trains have been running over this, no problem. I know I said trains weren't running. They are running, kind of, sort of. They still need a little bit of attention as they go around. So this joint has not been an issue at all. And then this area right here, not an issue. This is the second section. This is where the gate opens up and swings apart. You'll notice that I have some rail joiners that are flattened out there. They are not for conductivity. They are simply to hold these rails in alignment. For whatever reason, there is, and this is where the Cato unit joiner would be, there is a fairly large expanse of section where the rail's unsupported, no plastic joiners, because you're supposed to have the rail joiner in there. Well, I was finding out that these things could get knocked out of position, and that would lead to a derailment. So by flattening out the railhead on one side, which allows the rail section to slide in, it gave just enough support from the section next to it to keep everything in alignment, and this has worked perfectly. So I'm very happy with this bridge. The hinges are simple gate hinges that I found at Home Depot. They are spring-loaded, so if you pull this out and let it go, it will swing shut. The intention is not that I want it to swing shut. The intention was simply to keep pressure and to keep it aligned so that it is tight against the jam. You'll notice that the hinge is not fully closed, so 90 degrees would be right about here. It's offset at an angle, and that's by design so that that hinge is always holding this track against the other side. I did not want to have a latch or something else that would impede getting through the gate on the layout. Even if I am running trains, it's still easy enough to open this up, walk on through, close it behind myself. I know that it lines up perfectly, and I can continue on my way. And that is where my luck ran out. Although I was able to salvage the intermodal yard and I was able to move it all in one glorious piece, it was just too wide for the area that I had available. And I was not willing to sacrifice walkway space between the new layout and the old layout to give that yard the space it needed. So yeah, it went. So out of all of my goals, that was the one that was not accomplished. I ended up losing my yard. Obviously, I salvaged all the containers and all of the parts and pieces from it, and the trains, which you can see are sort of scattered all over the place here. It was not, it was unfortunate, but we had to do what we had to do to make it work. So this is where we're at, and I'll just have to rebuild it, and I'll rebuild it better. So, out of all of the things that I'm a little disappointed in, that was probably the biggest one. But you know, we're where we are, so we'll keep on moving and won't worry about it at this point. So got to get the new intermodal yard done, and my goal is to have the focus on the intermodal yard and less on the main line, because once again, it's a straight shot main line. It's not real exciting. And you'll notice that I did use a lot of flex track. This is actually Kato flex track. I did not realize that Kato, whatever you want to call it, made flex track, but they also make the cork that goes with it. And it lines up perfectly with their Unitrack. Go figure, right? So my goal was to continue to use the Unitrack because it is just a fantastic system. It looks good, it runs good, it's reliable. But price-wise, for the amount of track that I was running, the flex track makes a lot more sense. So 2 boxes of flex track and 2 boxes of cork were a lot cheaper than, you know, package after package after package of 5-foot sections or 5-inch sections. And the other thing that is nice is you can sort of cheat it a little bit more than flex track is very rigid, right? So although you can sort of sway off your path, it wants to lock together in one way, where flex track gives me the option to do some sort of fancy track work, I'll call it, just gentle curves and sort of allow for a little bit of alignment that the standard Unitrack wouldn't allow for. So I'm okay with that. It's definitely a nice way to go. Requires some soldering. Their joiners, which they also make for them, are really tight, and they are finger destroyers, so you've got to have some pliers and some other tools handy. But they solder together real nice and quick, good joint, and electrically, obviously, it's a lot nicer than having a bunch of Unitrack joints, even though, you know, I really have never had any issues with my Unitrack joints. So, okay, well, anyway, let's get up here. This is the Y. So this affords me something that I was not able to do before, and that is take a train from either direction into staging. So beforehand, the train had to be running in a certain direction, which was opposite the typical grain of traffic on the layout, and it had to go through that small, I'm going to call it an interchange yard, and it was not ideal. So what I've done now is, and we'll see the rest of it here in just a moment. I've got the Y, and the Y, yes, still comes off of one side of the track. However, if you look right here, you will notice that there is a crossover right here. So if the train is left-hand running, it can cross over, and it can then run up the Y. If the train is coming down from the Y and wants to head in this direction towards the main layout, it can come down on the left-hand side, and because the Allegheny Northern is right-hand running, it can then cross over and be back on the right-hand side. Now, one thing that I did skip over just unintentionally is that I do have a crossover down here. So what this does is this allows me to get around my intermodal yard. So if a train is coming up on the right-hand side, as it should, but the intermodal yard, which uses the main line here as pretty much most of its lead, it's got a very short lead before it's up onto the main line, I can now run trains from here all the way back, which is plenty of distance to shove and not affect mainline traffic. So they can cross over, now they're left-hand running, until they get past the intermodal yard, where they can then switch back and continue on their way. And then if they are, for some reason, left-hand running from over here, or right-hand running, they can cross over to the left-hand side momentarily, and from here to the Y, then they can, if they're heading in this direction, get up onto the Y and up into staging. So no matter which direction the trains are heading now, they can get into staging. This Y obviously required an AR1 to properly align the DCC signal, so that's sitting right under here. And then that brings us to this gate, which is in the process of being aligned. So I am going to swing this open here, and we'll take a spin around. So real quick, these aren't quite finished yet. I just sort of am in the process of forming them. But what I wanted to show you was when I get a gap, and sometimes, you know, you want a gap in your track, you've got to fill that gap with something. And these gaps, it turned out to be a little bit larger than I had anticipated. I honestly don't know how I either mismeasured or something shifted in the layout process, but I ended up with a pretty big gap there. So these are simply pieces of plastic, polystyrene. They are super glued in place, and then once the super glue is dry, I take a Dremel to remove most of them, and then use needle files to do the rest of the work and shape the plastic in the shape of the railhead. So what we end up with is what I'm calling my plastic rails, and they are, this one still is not quite done yet. You can see the car kind of bumps over it, but the point is, if you let the car go, it will slide right over it and keep on rolling, so it stays on the track. And that's basically what I'm looking for, you know, to get over there. And it's not going to affect your electric conductivity. It'll ride, the locomotives will ride right over this and keep on going. So this one still needs a little bit of work to it. I stopped to do the video, so that's what I was working on right before. And anyway, let's keep on going here. So okay, double track. Up this, I'm over my bench work here, and there's styrofoam and stuff just everywhere right now. But I've got this nice long run here of track, and I have a crossover right here. This is right before the Y, right before the bridge. So at this point, trains can determine whether they want to go which direction on the layout, because if they're coming down here, they are going to stay right-hand running. And continue the layout that direction. If they go over to here, then they are going to be left-hand running for a time, but they can, at the first crossover, bounce back over and head in the right direction. So this track is intended to be used as additional staging. I know the lights are kind of bright there. It is not going to be double main line the entire way. It eventually turns into a single right here. So you can make your track selection right up here, which is probably how most trains will do it before they slide down the siding here. They're gonna pick which direction they're heading. But because I figured I could be storing trains on this rather long stretch of track, I wanted to have the ability to switch them down there and get them over, because obviously most of this was done because trains were not being properly marshaled around the layout and couldn't go where they wanted to go. So in any event, working on some adjustments here. I've got a bit of a steeper incline than I had anticipated. It happened due to a math goof that I had on the very far end. So I'm working this out. Right now everything's sort of just sitting there on risers. So working through that issue to get this all realigned. It's not done yet. But then of course the rest of the staging yard is as it was. Now I will tell you that a time back I had used these Atlas turnouts, and my God, do I hate them. They are just they're just very unreliable, and I don't know if I got a bad batch, but I've got, let's see, 2, 4, 6, and 9. I got 11 of these things, and they all have the same issue. I had to take a file in here and widen these out, and it just they just, even with when I use the if I don't use the ground throw, if I use the machine to throw them, they just don't always throw. They get stuck on themselves. I just Atlas does a lot of really nice things. Turnouts, not one of them. So that's my 2 cents. So I think I'll be ripping these out at some point and replacing them all with Kato. I just, right now, that's not priority, so this will work for now. But let's go back to the layout. I got one other area that I changed, and I'll show you the new electronics as well. So just in case anyone was going to ask, and before I move on any further, if anybody wanted to know, these are the gate hinges that I used. They are designed for around pools, so it's D&D Technologies. Never heard of them, don't know anything about them other than the fact that they work perfectly for what I wanted. And I held on to this package just long enough to show you. Comes with the screws and hardware that you need to put it together. So basically all you gotta do is line it up and put it together. Okay, so as we're coming back towards the front here, I did put a new Digitrax connection for my throttle. And that is because I did not want to have to rely on the wireless to get through the layout right here. It does sometimes, sort of, it's not real responsive. So I can plug right in here. It's got enough tether on it that I can stand at my yard with my throttle and do what I need to do here. So that was one of the electrical upgrades that I made. Okay, one of the major electrical upgrades that I made was the purchase of a booster. And that was necessary because I didn't feel that the small Zephyr Express was going to have the juice that I needed to power that much layout. And although it probably could have, because of the number of locomotives and trains that I run, I was worried about signal distortion and some other things that you can have happen with DCC. So purchased the new booster there. I'm going to move that cable up. It is the DB210. I know there's a lot of different options out there, but I've got it, you know, it's all hooked up. Everything there, including the power source, is Digitrax. It just keeps things simple. I know there's a lot of options that you can do with all of that, but I'm using the Zephyr still as the command station, so for programming and sending out the signal and all that sort of stuff. I'm still using the Express, and then that booster is just simply taking that signal to the new section of layout. Okay, so the last little bit of change here is that I removed that turnout. You can still see the feeder wires poking through the layout there. And I removed those pieces of track that were heading back into the staging area. I'm going to model an abandoned line there because, well, quite frankly, what I did was abandon the line. So I'm going to put that scenery together. It'll probably be one of the first things I do in putting the layout back, just because it's one of the easiest things to model. And it's just going to be a little bit of scenery and some material. So I'll go ahead and take care of that here probably in the next couple of weekends. And that'll at least put something back together. Okay, and my memory is just a little fuzzy. I can't remember if I did this as part of a late July or an early August project, but I did finally get a building where I can take my reefer cars. So they have a reason to be on the layout again, which is, you know, kind of exciting because they're kind of cool, and I do enjoy having them on the layout. Let's say they are parked right there. So they really didn't have a place to go because there was no cold storage anywhere. But now we've got a cold storage place. So once I get back to the scenery work, that is a new home for some rolling stock. Okay, so bringing this thing home here, there's some lessons learned. I made several, and I'm still not exactly sure how I did it, but I made several math calculations that were slightly off in building some of the bench work. So they've all been corrected since they were made, but they caused me to redo some work, which was sort of a pain. So as careful as I was and as drawn out as my plans were, I still had some goofs, but we took care of those. I do have some grades here that are fairly steep, and it is leading me towards a direction that I didn't necessarily want to go, but now I'm sort of embracing, and that is the idea of distributed power. And so just through some simple tests, I realized that having 3 or 4 locomotives on the front, yeah, they could pull the train, but some of the drag on the cars was so much that, just like the real trains, I was getting some either pull aparts or you know, I was pulling them off the rails on the turns and some things like that. But that problem goes away when you put either a mid train, which seemed to be the most helpful, or a rear train DPU. So since my trains typically run with 3 or 4 locomotives anyway, it's not real difficult to take that locomotive and throw it into the middle of the train. What it does do is adds a little more complexity to the operation of the train itself, because now instead of being able to just do simple consisting, I've got to do advanced consisting, which is one of those things that I have yet to learn with DCC, even though I've been running the system now for a year and a half, 2 years, whatever it is. So I have to get into a little more advanced consisting, and for those of you who are scratching your head going, I don't understand why, well, it's very simple. If I have them all simple consisted, meaning that they all have the same address, and I want to, let's say, break the train apart in order to switch an industry or do a set out, I can't isolate the unit in the middle of the train. It's going to keep going with whatever the main locomotives do. So I can't really break the train apart. With advanced consisting, in theory, I could have the lead locomotives simple consisted, and then the distributed power unit advanced consisted so I can separate it from the train and be able to move the power around. But I haven't played with it yet. It's a new concept. It's something that I need to do and sort of work out. The other thing is, as you're looking down here, I don't know that you can necessarily tell, but the staging yard, or the intermodal yard rather, is at a fairly severe angle. And I thought I was being smarter than the average bear by sloping the bench work rather than trying to build a bunch of risers. And for everything but this area, it worked splendidly. But because I've got a yard that needs to be level so cars don't roll out of it, it is sort of not working very well here. So I need to get in there and sort of level it, and I figured the best way to do it is, rather than having the yard sit down below the main line like it is now, I'm going to simply raise it up and actually hide the main line. That will let a good chunk of the straight main line be hidden and add a little more interest for the viewer. So that's the solution. I just haven't executed yet because I'm still trying to get the main line functioning. But in general, it's working out the way I planned. I was most fearful of the gates, the swing gates, because I haven't had one, and I was concerned about being able to cut the parts and pieces, make them work correctly, and I was able to sort of get over that and make it work. So this gate here works flawlessly. I have no issues with that one. I did have some issues with the one in the back, which is I'm working on it now. And to be honest, I realigned some things in the bench work, which sort of threw it out of whack. So I'm working on getting that straightened out today. And I've already had to do a couple loads of laundry the month of August, obviously. So, you know, I found that these gates, well, yes, they are in the way, because they block the way. It's not too difficult to get by them and get the laundry to where it needs to go. So basically, I have achieved most of my goals. You can come down into the layout now, and you can pretty much walk right into the layout, get right to the controls, and start running trains. And the only time you need to venture through this maze is if you are going to work the intermodal yard, going to work the staging yard, or you're going to the workbench. And of course, if you're trying to do the laundry. But in general, this is working out very nicely. I know the room is a mess. There is scenery all over the place. I don't know what happened to Union Station. It's under there somewhere. And I sort of lost most of my yard there, and the gravel building is sitting on top of it's a mess down here. So I don't know how far I'm going to make it in September, because we're already a weekend in. And then not next weekend, but the weekend after is the N-Scale weekend in Altoona. So I'll be heading out there, which means, although I'll be doing train things, I won't be in the train room. So, yeah, this is kind of sort of where we're at. Hopefully by next month's video, I've got some trains running, and you can see how that's turning out. So until next time, keep on modeling, and we'll see you in September.